So this is some of what I'll be presenting today is some of the work Alexander and I have been engaged in for the last couple of years, and we're sort of inching towards several publications on this and developing the model further. So our model is intended as an inspiration for theorizing the aging technology nexus. So we definitely want to make it clear that there are other approaches possible and other concepts can be added on, but we think our model does provide a certain amount of guidance for looking at certain pertinent questions. So, okay, while you have a go at that, I'll continue onwards. German technology has for a long time had a promise to basically change the lives of older people with technology. And this promise has gone accompanied with large investments in these kinds of technologies. And if you look at that, it's really investments on the level of billions and billions of euros, dollars, pounds, wherever you are. And these investments have not really led to a serious amount of technological change in everyday life, which is quite extraordinary, really. This week, my university gave me a new mobile phone. This is now the 7th smartphone I own. I got my first one in 2005, and that was also when I started work on gerontechnology. And if you look at what has happened in terms of how that smartphone has developed over those years, things have really improved. However, if we look at what's happened in the world of gerontechnology, not a lot of technologies have come about and have changed the life worlds of older people. So that's actually quite an important question. Hey, we've been spending all these billions of euros and pounds and dollars on these technologies, and we're not getting much of a revenue in terms of improving the lives of older people. So the impact's largely missing, and for us, and that's one of the claims we make in this presentation, partly, not totally, but partly, that's due to a view on the relationship between aging and technology and how technology influences aging. That's largely implicit, that we want to make explicit, and that we want to challenge and show a different view of this relationship. So we've called this existing view a linear model of innovation. You could also call it technology push model. But basically what we mean is that there are designers and engineers who want to make a technology for older people, and then they have to go through a certain amount of steps, and then at the end comes out a successful technology. At least that's the idea. So you start out with gathering what the needs of older people are, then you go to your lab, design a technology, and then there are certain steps you need to go through to make people accept this technology. And in this model, it's very heavily focused on medical problems, on bodily problems, but it also positions older people, often it positions them as very passive, as technologically incompetent, but also they have to play the role of the grateful acceptor of this wonderful technology that's going to massively improve their lives, which obviously it doesn't. Above all, in this linear model, we see acceptance as something that can be orchestrated, and that's something as an end product of a linear process. Now we've dubbed this the interventionist logic, and we've also, in one of our papers in the past, pointed to how paternalistic this is. It's designers, engineers in research institutes, in companies, making decisions about the lives of older people, about what's wise, what's good, what's safe for older people to do. Um, Now, Marijntje Smits, she's a colleague of us in Utrecht, has used a nice term for what we end up with in this kind of process, and that's the monster. The technological monster is, in essence, a technology that it works, it does what it needs to do on the box. However, it doesn't have a place. It doesn't fit in with the lives of older people. So you have these monstrosities that they function, but they don't function at the same time. So what we suggest is we need to go from a linear view of the relationship between aging and technology to a cyclical view. And if we do that, we unearth a whole lot of questions which we think are important. So this is basically our model. We've kept it as simple as we can. And if people who are from SDS will immediately recognize that this is based on actor network theory, and then in particular the work by Madeleine Acriche and Brunel of the early 1990s. Basically what we have is four different, what we've called arenas, which are interlinked. So there's translation and transferal going on. What is transferred differs from one arena to the other. But I'll be going through all four arenas individually to talk that over. What's interesting also is that two of these arenas, the design world and the arena of the technological artifact, have been studied extensively in SDS. Laboratory studies go back to the early or the late 70s in SDS. Studies of, for instance, gender scripts, how technologies position you as male or female. There's been many of these studies in the 90s and the early 2000s. The other two arenas, life worlds of older people and images of aging, have been studied extensively in aging studies. And we think you really need both perspectives to make sense of what's going on and how we need to understand the relationship between aging and technology. So our basic premise is that aging and technology co-shape each other. So we see cycles of one arena to the next. There's some more complexity to that, but we'll get to that on the end. Let's start with images of aging. So this is a classic topic in aging studies, and there's been a lot of beautiful work on this. What's maybe less well understood is that this is actually very relevant, also the work that's already been done, for understanding how technologies come about. And just to give you an example, this is an oil painting by a Dutch artist. He's called Marius, that's gone off, Marius van Dokkum. And this exemplifies for me a lot of the ways in which designers and engineers think about older people. What I particularly love in this picture is the way the mouse is hanging from the cup of tea. Not being recognized as an implement you need to use the computer. And what I also particularly love is the finger that's pressing down hard on one of the buttons, as if that would help the button work better. And on the one hand, this is a bit of fun. On the other hand, this really relates to how we see designers and engineers thinking about older people. Older people are technologically illiterate. They cannot use technology. Quite literally, I've been in a project where one of the designers said, if you give them one button, they have a button to operate it wrong. So we'll give them no interface at all, none, which ended up in just passive monitoring system that monitors you without any way for you to interact or have control over your privacy or your relationship with the technology. So these images of aging that designers have are actually very important. But if you look into how did they come about, what did engineers and researchers do to come to these images, then yes, you do see designers with very thorough ethnographic studies who have a very detailed understanding of older people. You also see, and this was just a couple weeks ago, I met an engineer and he said, yes, we did user research because we used personas. So I asked him, well, what did you do then? Oh yeah, we came together with a group of engineers and we sat on at a table discussing what older people are like. And we made stories based on those ideas. And those are our personas. So that means that there was no engagement with older people at all, only stereotypical ideas of what old age is, what it's like to age. And that then becomes the basis for design decisions. And that actually makes it quite important because ultimately that leads to technologies that enter the life world of older people. Also important, and what we see a lot of, specifically in the European context, is what we call grand narratives. We see these stories about older people as a problem. So these ideas of the tsunami, the silver tsunami. We also see these narratives of the silver economy and the potential economic gains that can be had. We see stories about the digital divide. And these also strongly influence what designers do and why they decide to make technologies in a certain way. So it's not necessarily that images of aging is just a representation of the life world of older people. It can also be these grand narratives that feed into the cycle at this point. So this link between life world and images of aging is already very, very problematic and actually warrants a lot of study. So, moving on to the design world. So this is a professional world. This is research institutes, this is companies, where the technology is actually designed and produced. What we see here is that we may have older people coming to these institutions and providing their views, but it may not necessarily be the case that they are taken seriously. So this is a robot that I studied about 10 years ago in a laboratory at a big healthcare company, healthcare technology company in the Netherlands. And what we found there is I was in their lab observing the interaction between the researchers and the older people. The older people were playing games with this robot, and at the end of the interaction, the researchers asked him, how did you like the interaction? And he said, oh yeah, I thought it was fun. And then they asked him, would you want to own a robot like that? And more than 90% of them said, no, no, this is not a robot for me. This is a robot for older people, and I'm not old. And that's actually, that example that comes up again and again and again and again in so many innovation projects. But the interesting thing there was that what baffled me is that the designers and researchers that I met were totally unimpressed by this opinion. They found their ways to ignore the input of older people and just do the project that they wanted to do. So even if older people are present in the design world, it does not necessarily mean that their input is taken seriously. What's also important is to know that the design world has its own constraints. Not everything is possible, and people in STS have this sort of idea that they blame designers and engineers for the decisions they make, but then do not take into account that also designers and engineers are constrained in what they can or cannot do, which doesn't dissolve them from all blame, but it's something to consider. But what we do see is that in the design world we often see a technological culture which guides projects towards certain solutions. High-tech solutions are preferable to low-tech solutions, for instance. I once studied a project in which they really wanted to use ambient intelligent cameras. And then in the end, they found that motion sensors did a much better job, and they were very disappointed. because motion sensors are no fun to tinker with. So what we see then from this technological culture is that there is a way in which certain solutions are foregrounded over other solutions. Problems that are easily made into parameters which you can program into your device are actually favorable over more complicated problems like, for instance, developing technologies to combat loneliness, for instance. It's much more easy to do something for a bodily problem. They also very much want to create doable problems which they can solve technically, reliably within a certain amount of time. And that already frames what kind of solutions can come out of a design trajectory. So, moving on to technological artifacts. What we see then in the design world is that engineers have values, norms, ideas about what roles older people should play, ideas about the technological literacy. If we go back to the image of the finger pressing down on the key, that was a good indication of that. And they build these ideas into technology. And in STS, we use the concept of scripting to shed light on that. So what script is actually a scenario for use that guides the user based on the ideas of what is appropriate behavior of an older person. Those ideas are obviously come from a designer. So just to make that concrete, this is a phone made by a Swedish company, and what we see here is a certain script, an age script. Important in age scripts is that they can constrain and enable. So this is a phone for people with dementia, and the idea here is that all the keys to enter a phone number have been covered. So there's only the 4 pictures to press, and when you press the picture, you call that specific person. Now, on the one hand, that tremendously constrains you because you cannot call all other individuals than those 4. But on the other hand, if you have dementia and it's difficult for you to make telephone calls, this might just enable you to use the telephone a little bit longer and call those people who are important to you. But the most important thing here is that there was a designer at some point who made a decision about what is appropriate for a person with dementia to do or how they would behave. And on the basis of that, they came up with this solution that does constrain you in what you want to do with your telephone. Also important is what we call black boxing, that those design decisions made by a designer, made by an engineer, are no longer visible. You cannot discuss this with the designer, challenge it. You can only interact with the telephone, and it only has so many options for you to do that. In that respect, we've come up with this term of double naturalization. If you have images of aging which are ageist, which are simplified stereotypical images, and they feed into the design process, that's sort of a naturalized form of talking about older people. Then subsequently they can be made obdurate, materialized into technologies. And these technologies then start acting in the world. And there's nobody at that point who, or very few, there's us, asking questions about how this technology came about. But in general, very few questions are asked about the technology. It's just the way it is. So it's another way in which ageist ideas, stereotypical ideas, are being brought into the world and who can act very, very powerfully. Now it's important to say at this point that older people are not powerless. We see many examples of older people who selectively use or circumvent or not use the technology at all. But it is the case that if you introduce technologies like this, you're going to have to negotiate this. You're going to have to find out how you can rip the cover off the phone, if that is at all possible, or find a different phone. You have to negotiate that. So, finally then, the life world of older people. So, obviously important in this respect is that these life worlds are diverse, they are multiple. There is a great variety of the ways older people interact with technology. And for us it's also important to point out that there's this reciprocal creation of what it means to age, and also what a technology can and cannot mean and can and cannot do in the life world. And this is also why one of the important reasons why we chose a cyclical model, because it doesn't end from a trip from images to design world to objects and then to the life world. There's learning going on both on the side of designers and on the side of older people, and then there can be continuous cycles, which obviously it can also not happen, but it's definitely an option. So yeah, we talked a bit about non-use and selective use, but I also want to point out creativity and diversity in the life world of older people. And also the use of simple technologies. So this is from a study which we conducted in the Netherlands over the last couple of years. And what you see here is a little block of wood covered in leather, which an older lady has placed under the handle of the door to her garden. And this is her alarm system. Her bedroom is adjacent to this, in a room adjacent to this room. And if anybody feels the door from the outside, the block falls on the ground, makes a big noise, and then she says, "That'll wake me up." And under her bed she has a little table leg, and she says, I'll attack my assailant with that table leg. More importantly, when she wakes up in the morning and the block is still there, she knows that nobody has been around and felt the door. That gives her reassurance. It's a very simple solution, but you wouldn't believe the amount of money that's been spent on high-tech surveillance technologies, safety systems to keep older people safe. This also does the job. And these are things that are going on in the life world of older people. And I'm really interested in this, and I think we should be much more, because there are solutions being made for everyday life problems, and it doesn't have to involve high-tech innovation. And to us, this can also be a way of reimagining, rethinking what technology should actually do for older people, and also what kind of interface it should have. So, starting just a couple last slides to sort of finish this off. Some of the key features of our model, yeah, you see a production of technology in the model, a production of an older user, which evolves over time. We also see the production of new problems, new fixes, new ideas about aging, new ideas about what technology should do. And change occurs when these cycles are happening. We shouldn't take the direction of the arrows too literally. It could definitely be the case that something is designed in the design world, is made into a technology that is prototyped, and at that point it's already seen, well, this is going to fail, we're going to go back to images. What do people really want? What do people really need? So it's not necessarily that you always have to visit all arenas. The outcome doesn't have to be a functioning technology. Most innovations fail. And I think in aging, the world of technologies for aging, it's, well, I had a discussion with one of my colleagues, and we sort of guessed that between 95 and 98% of technologies never ever make it to the market. We shouldn't presuppose that older people are passive. We shouldn't presuppose that they are active resistors either. It allows a focus on non-use. I think these are all important themes. And I think it allows for using different concepts and different methodologies of analyzing life worlds and design worlds. So, in conclusion, technology and aging are both unstable. We cannot presume, as many models do, that one or the other is stable, but they shape each other, they co-constitute each other in these arenas. So for us, we need to move away from linear models. We need to move away from words like intervention, acceptance, solutions, impact, which are the words that go along with these models. If anything, because if we want to understand and facilitate acceptance, if that's something what we want to do, we cannot start from a model that presupposes acceptance in the first place. So finally, some ideas about the future, which we promised. So these, we can study the complexity of cat relations with this model. It allows us to get a sort of an interplay going on between SDS and aging study. And on an empirical level, a lot of that is already happening. We have to move on into conceptual work and more theoretical work, I think. It highlights a focus on certain problematic relationships within the model. For instance, the relationship between what images of aging are used as input for design and how that relates to the life world. For us, that's a very problematic relationship that really warrants more research because there seems to be a very big disconnection between what's happening in the life world and what's happening in terms of images of aging. The model also highlights that the design world, the laboratory, the company, is an area where gerontological research is actually very important, but it's currently not happening that much. And as a final direction for future research, we think it's actually very important that we develop ways of engaging with design and research. It's not enough for us to sit in conference halls and say, oh, it's all very bad and it's all going very wrong. We need to engage and try to help designers and engineers improve technologies. And particularly in design, a lot of people are open to having discussions about this. So that was it for today. Thank you very much.